wind howled through the frozen streets of Neuralis. Snow covered the alien city like a white blanket of silence. Tall glass towers shimmered with blue light, but below them, the markets were filled with misery, broken stalls, hungry eyes, and shadows of people who had lost everything. Among them walked a woman named Lyra, her thin arms wrapped around her small child Taryn. Her steps were slow, her breath weak, and her eyes full of fear. She had once been part of a noble family, but that life was gone. The war had burned her city, taken her husband, and left her with nothing but her son. Now she walked through the market searching for food. Her clothes were torn, her feet numb from the cold ground. She stopped at a fruit stall, her voice shaking. "Please, something for my child," she begged. The alien merchant looked at her with disgust. "No credits, no food," he said coldly, turning away. Taryn coughed in her arms, his small body trembling. Lyra's heart broke a little more. She looked down at her clothes, the last thing she owned. She took off her outer layer, a long silver cloak once worn by nobles. She held it out to the merchant. "Take this, please, just a little food." The merchant sneered but took the cloak. He tossed her a half-rotten piece of bread. She caught it quickly, holding it like treasure. "Thank you," she whispered, even though it was hardly kindness. Lyra sat in a corner of the cold market and tore the bread into pieces. She gave most of it to Taryn, who ate slowly with shaking hands. The snow began to fall again, and the people around them moved on. Some looked at her with pity, others with judgment. To them, she was nothing but a fallen woman from a broken race, a symbol of defeat and shame. Lyra didn't care what they thought anymore. All she cared about was keeping her son alive. Suddenly, she heard laughter from nearby. 2 alien guards seen. Ud by a heater, watching her. "Look at her," one said. "A noble trading her clothes for crumbs." The other guard smirked. Her kind had power once. Now they beg like animals. Lyra kept her head down, her eyes filled with tears. She whispered softly to her child, "Don't listen, Taryn. Just eat." But the words hurt more than the cold. The guards walked away, still laughing, their boots leaving deep marks in the snow. Then from the shadows, a man watched quietly. He was human, tall, and wrapped in a heavy coat, his eyes sharp but kind. His name was Elias, an engineer working for the Galactic Relief Program. He had come to Neuralis to rebuild machines, not to see suffering like this. But when he saw Lyra giving away her last clothing for food, something inside him broke. He had seen poor people before, but never such hopelessness in someone's eyes. He watched her feed the child, her hands shaking, her body almost collapsing. When she tried to stand, she stumbled and fell into the snow. The bread dropped from her hands and Taryn cried out. The crowd turned their faces away, pretending not to see. Elias couldn't move for a moment. Then his instincts took over. He ran forward and knelt beside her. "Hey, stay still," he said gently, lifting her head. Her skin was cold, her lips pale, her breathing shallow. Taryn clung to her, his small voice trembling. "Mama, wake up!" Elias looked around, but no one offered help. Not one of the alien merchants moved. "Heartless," he muttered, pulling off his own coat and wrapping it around her. He lifted Lyra in his arms, the child still holding on. The snow fell harder now, covering their footprints as he carried them away. The guards shouted at him, "Leave her! She's not your kind!" But Elias didn't stop. He turned his head and said only one thing. "Then maybe your kind has forgotten what it means to be alive." He disappeared into the maze of narrow streets. The storm howled louder, but inside his heart burned a quiet fire. He didn't know who this woman was or what danger she might bring. He only knew one thing. No one should die cold and hungry while he had the power to help. As he walked through the snow, the faint light of dawn touched the city skyline, and for the first time in many years, a spark of humanity warmed the frozen heart of Neuralis. When Lyra opened her eyes, everything felt quiet. The sound of the market, the wind, and the laughter of cruel guards were gone. Instead, there was warmth, a soft humming of machines, and the faint smell of metal and smoke. She blinked and saw a small metal ceiling above her. A dim yellow light flickered from an old bulb. Beside her, on a rough cot, her child Taryn slept peacefully, his tiny hand clutching the blanket. For the first time in many nights, he wasn't shivering. Lyra tried to sit up, but pain shot through her arms. Her voice came out weak. Where are we?" A man's voice answered from behind a half-open door, calm and steady. "You're safe for now." Lyra turned her head and saw Elias, the human from the market. He stood near a small stove, pouring something into 2 cups. Steam rose from them, carrying the faint smell of broth. His clothes were rough, his hands covered in grease and burns from long hours of work, but his eyes were warm and full of concern. "I found you in the snow," Elias said softly. "You were barely breathing and your son was freezing." He handed her the cup. "It's not much, but it's warm." Lyra took it slowly, her hands trembling. Why did you help me? She whispered. Elias shrugged. Because no one else. He would. He smiled a little, but there was sadness behind it. I fix machines, not people, but you looked like you needed someone to care. Lyra stared at him, confused and cautious. Her kind didn't trust humans easily. The war between their species had left deep scars. Many of her people still believed humans were cruel, cold-hearted creatures. But this human had carried her out of the storm. He had given her shelter when everyone else turned away. She didn't know what to think. Her voice broke. You shouldn't have done that. They will punish you if they find out. Elias looked at her firmly. Let them try. Outside, snow tapped against the metal walls like tiny fingers. The city of Neuralis was cruel to outsiders. Humans were allowed only as workers, engineers, builders, and traders, but never equals. If the local patrols discovered Elias had sheltered an alien fugitive, he could lose his job, his license, maybe even his life. But he didn't seem afraid. He spent the next few hours checking old heaters, adjusting wires, making sure the room stayed warm. Lyra watched him, silently wondering what kind of man he was. Terran woke up, rubbing his eyes. When he saw Elias, he hid behind his mother. Elias smiled kindly. Hey, little guy, you're safe. He handed him a small cube that glowed softly. It's a heating stone. It'll keep you warm. Terran took it carefully, curiosity shining in his tired eyes. Lyra's heart softened for a moment, seeing her son smile again. She whispered, He hasn't smiled since the war. Elias looked down, his voice quiet. Then maybe today is a start. As hours passed, the outside storm grew worse. Through the narrow window, Lyra saw the patrol drones flying across the city, their red lights searching every corner. Posters flashed on the screens outside. Wanted, woman and child seen in Sector 9. Her breath caught, fear filling her chest. Elias saw her expression and understood immediately. They're looking for you, he said, not asking, just knowing. Lyra nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. My son. They want him. Elias frowned. Why? Lyra hesitated, her hands shaking. I can't tell you, she said softly. It's too dangerous. Elias walked closer, his voice low but steady. I don't care what he is or what they say he's worth. No one touches a child while I'm alive. Lyra looked up at him, shocked by the fire in his words. For a long moment, there was silence between them. Only the hum of old machines filled the air. She wanted to believe him, to trust him, but her world had taught her fear. Still, something about this human felt different. He wasn't cold. He wasn't cruel. He had nothing to gain and everything to lose. And yet, he stayed. As night fell, Elias placed another blanket over them. You should rest, he said, sitting near the door with a small plasma tool in hand. Lyra closed her eyes, holding Terran close, but sleep didn't come easily. Outside, she could hear the faint sound of patrol boots echoing in the snow. Inside, the small heater flickered with a warm glow, and in that quiet moment, she realized something she hadn't felt in years. Hope, a fragile spark born not from her own kind, but from a human's heart. 3 days passed in quiet hiding. Elias had repaired an old generator, making the small room warmer. Lyra cleaned the place, cooked simple meals, and tried to stay unseen. Terran spent his days drawing shapes on the metal floor with bits of charcoal. To anyone else, it looked like a normal life. But Elias could feel something strange in the air. The machines around the child sometimes hummed without power. Metal tools would shake slightly whenever Terran cried. And at night, a faint blue glow appeared under his skin, like light trapped in his veins. Elias tried to ignore it at first, telling himself it was just the dim lights or his tired mind. But the pattern repeated every night, stronger each time. Once, while fixing a panel, he dropped his wrench near T. Aaron, before it hit the ground, it stopped, floating in the air for a second before falling slowly. Elias froze, staring at the tool. Terran just looked at him, his innocent eyes glowing faintly. Did you see it? Elias whispered. The boy nodded softly. It didn't want to fall. That night, after Terran had fallen asleep, Elias sat across from Lyra. He spoke carefully, his tone calm but serious. Your son. He's not just sick, is he? Lyra's hands trembled, and she looked away. I told you it's dangerous to know. Elias leaned forward. Dangerous for who? Him or the people hunting you? Her silence was the only answer he needed. He sighed and spoke softly. If you want my help, I need the truth, Lyra. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she took a deep breath, her eyes filled with pain and fear. Terran isn't like other children, she said finally. He was born during the war, in one of the science labs my people built. Elias frowned. A lab. Lyra nodded. We were losing the war, so our leaders tried to make something new, a child who could survive both worlds. Elias's heart tightened. You mean, he's part human? Lyra closed her eyes and nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. Yes, my child is half human, half Norlin. Elias sat back, stunned. It was forbidden. Both governments had banned genetic mixing after the war. Such a child would be seen as an abomination, not a miracle. They would kill him if they found out, he whispered. Lyra's voice broke. They already tried. She told him how the lab was destroyed, how she escaped in the chaos with her newborn son. For years, she had hidden in slums, always moving, always afraid, until the patrols found her again in Norralis. I traded everything I had just to feed him, she said softly. But now even food is a risk. Elias looked toward the sleeping boy. He's not a threat, he said firmly. He's a child. Lyra smiled sadly. To you maybe, but to the galaxy he's proof that we could become something greater. Her words hung in the air, heavy and full of meaning. Elias rubbed his forehead, thinking hard. If the authorities discovered Terran, they would not just kill him, they would dissect him, study him, and anyone helping them would vanish too. But Elias couldn't abandon them. Not now. He looked at Lyra, his voice steady. Then we'll have to make sure no one ever finds out. From that moment, he began changing everything. He rerouted the room's power through hidden lines so no energy trace could be tracked. He built false readings into the sensors outside. He even crafted a new ID code for Lyra, labeling her as a factory worker. Every night, he taught Terran small games to control his strange power. Don't let it show, Elias said gently. You have to keep it quiet. The boy nodded, trying to hide the glow whenever he felt afraid. Lyra watched them, her heart torn between gratitude and fear. Elias was risking everything for them, and she didn't know why. One evening, the three of them shared a small meal of heated grain. The air felt almost peaceful for once. Terran laughed as Elias made a small mechanical bird flap its wings. Lyra smiled for the first time since they had met. But outside, in the cold streets of Norralis, things were changing. Soldiers moved from sector to sector, scanning for energy anomalies. And on every public screen, a new message appeared. Reward for information on a woman with a glowing child. Inside the hidden room, Elias looked out the window, watching the drones hover past. He turned to Lyra and whispered, "They're getting closer." Lyra nodded, holding Terran tightly. Her voice trembled as she said, "They will never stop." Elias clenched his fists. "They cease." "And neither will I," he said quietly. The hum of machines filled the silence, and in that small hidden shelter, a fragile alliance of two worlds began to take shape. A mother, her half-human child, and a human who refused to walk away. The city of Norralis was no longer quiet. Drones buzzed across the skies like dark insects, scanning every street with red light. The air carried the hum of alarm systems and the whisper of fear. Posters showing Lyra's face were displayed on every holoscreen, beneath the cold words, "Wanted for genetic violation." The reward number blinked endlessly. Anyone who turned her in would earn more credits than most workers made in a year. Inside a small workshop near the lower docks, Elias worked without rest. His hands were covered in oil, his face tired but focused. Around him, pieces of machinery and metal scraps filled the room. He was building something, a small transport pod, half-rusted but strong. He called it the Shell, and it was their only hope. Lyra watched him silently as he welded metal plates together. The bright sparks reflected in her tearful eyes. She wanted to ask him why he was doing all this for her, but every time she opened her mouth, the words wouldn't come. Terran played quietly nearby, tracing shapes on the floor. Every now and then, the tools near him would tremble, as if alive. Elias noticed, but didn't say a word. He knew the child was trying to stay calm, trying to hide his strange power. Still, he could feel the tension growing. Every hour, new patrols moved closer to the docks. Every minute, the walls seemed to listen for them. One evening, Elias turned off the welding torch and sat beside Lyra. His voice was low, serious. "We can't stay here much longer," Lyra nodded. "I know. The patrols are scanning each sector one by one." Elias tapped the side of the pod. "This thing can take us beyond Norralis, maybe to the border planets." Lyra's eyes widened. "But that's suicide. No one escapes the scanners." Elias gave a small smile. "They scan for life, not for ghosts." He showed her a device, a small pulse jammer. "It will make us invisible to their sensors for a few minutes, enough to slip through." Lyra stared at him, a mix of hope and fear in her heart. "You're risking your life for us," she whispered. Elias shrugged. "Maybe I'm just tired of fixing machines for people who've forgotten how to feel." His words hit her harder than any weapon. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the wind howled through the metal streets, carrying the echo of alarms. That night, as they prepared their supplies, Elias heard a soft knock on the door. He froze, motioning for Lyra to hide. He opened the door slightly, his hand on a small plasma tool. A woman stood there, Kara, another human engineer. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "Elias, what are you doing?" she whispered harshly. "You're hiding her, aren't you? The woman from the alerts?" Elias didn't answer. His silence said enough. Kara stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You know what will happen if the patrols find out. You'll lose everything," Elias replied softly. "Then maybe everything isn't worth keeping." Kara's face softened for a second, then hardened again. "They're already searching this sector," she warned. "I can delay them, but not for long." Elias nodded. "Then give me until dawn." Kara hesitated, her loyalty torn between friendship and fear. Finally, she whispered, "I'll try, but Elias, if they catch you, I can't help." He nodded once. "I know." When the door closed, Lyra stepped out of the shadows. "Can we trust her?" she asked. Elias sighed. "I don't know, but we don't have a choice." He checked the pod's systems one last time. The engine hummed faintly, weak but alive. Terran crawled inside the small craft and looked around with wide eyes. "Is this going to fly?" he asked. Elias smiled tiredly. "If we're lucky, yes." Before sunrise, the distant sound of boots echoed through the metal streets. Lyra's heart pounded as she looked out the window. Dozens of patrols marched toward the docks. Elias grabbed his tools and whispered, "It's time." They loaded the last supplies. Lyra carried Terran inside the pod, wrapping him tightly. Elias activated the jammer, and the lights flickered. For a moment, the room seemed to vanish into static silence. Then suddenly, the door burst open. Kara stood there, breathing hard, her face pale. "They're here! They've surrounded the sector!" she cried. Elias cursed under his breath. Lyra clutched Terran close, her voice shaking. "What do we do?" Elias looked at her, his eyes steady. "We finish what we started," he said. He pulled a lever, and the pod's engine roared to life. The walls trembled, sparks flew, and alarms began to scream across the city. Outside, the soldiers shouted orders as the red lights closed in, and as the first rays of dawn touched the skyline of Neuralis, the small transport pod began to rise, trembling, ready to defy the world that wanted it destroyed. The pod trembled as it powered up, its engines glowing faintly in the cold dawn light. Elias checked the controls, his heart pounding. The jammer buzzed softly, making the sensors outside blind for a few seconds. But seconds were all they had. "Hold on!" he shouted. The small craft shuddered, rising from the ground like a wounded bird. Snow and smoke whirled around it, blurring the view of the approaching patrols. Lyra clutched Terran close, whispering prayers from her homeworld. The child's glowing hands tightened around her. He could feel the fear in the air, the heat of the engines, the chaos below. Then, suddenly, the pod jerked hard to the side. A blast hit the outer hull, shaking the entire cabin. Elias cursed under his breath. "They've locked onto us. Somehow they found the signal." Before he could react, the control panel flickered, static filled the screens, and red warning lights blinked wildly. The jammer had failed. The pod spun out of control, crashing into the side of a warehouse with a metallic scream. The world turned into fire, noise, and dust. When it stopped, Lyra opened her eyes to see smoke and shattered metal all around. Elias crawled out of the wreckage, blood running down his arm. "Terran, Lyra, are you okay?" he called, his voice shaking. Lyra coughed, clutching her son tightly. "We're fine." Before they could recover, the door burst open. Dozens of soldiers stormed in, their armor reflecting the firelight. Elias grabbed a broken pipe and stood in front of Lyra. "Run!" he shouted, but there was nowhere to run. The soldiers aimed their blasters, their commander stepping forward. She was tall, with cold silver eyes that showed no mercy. "Human engineer Elias Ward," she said sharply, "you are under arrest for harboring a fugitive and obstructing galactic law." Elias glared at her. "You're arresting the wrong person. She's just a mother." The commander smirked. "A mother carrying the galaxy's biggest crime." Lyra tried to speak, but one of the soldiers struck her with the butt of his rifle. She fell to the ground, Terran screaming her name. Elias roared in anger and swung the pipe at the guard. They fought brutally, but Elias was outnumbered. A stun blast hit his chest, and everything went dark. When he woke, he was in a cold, dim cell. Chains held his wrists, and pain throbbed through his body. He looked around, but Lyra and Terran were gone. Only the echo of footsteps filled the air. "Where are they?" he shouted, pulling against the chains. A voice answered from the shadows. It was Kara. She stepped into the light, her face pale, her eyes full of guilt. Elias froze, realization hitting him like a knife. "You told them," he whispered. "Ed." Kara's lips trembled. "I had no choice." Her voice broke. "They knew, Elias. They were already watching you. I tried to protect you." He stared at her, disbelief turning to rage. "You didn't protect me. You doomed them. Kara took a shaky breath. They promised they wouldn't hurt the child. They only wanted to study him. Elias laughed bitterly. Study him? You mean kill him? Kara looked away, tears falling down her cheeks. I didn't know what else to do. Elias's voice turned cold. You could have trusted me. For a moment, silence filled the cell, heavy and sharp. Then Kara whispered, I'm sorry. She reached into her pocket and placed a small device on the floor. This will unlock the door in 10 minutes, she said softly. They're moving the woman and child to the main facility. After that, you'll never see them again. Elias stared at her, his voice trembling. Why are you helping me now? She whispered. Because I saw the boy's eyes, Elias, and I saw what we've become. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the dark corridor. Elias waited, his heart pounding. The device blinked and clicked, unlocking the metal cuffs. He stood, every muscle aching, but his mind burning with one thought. He had to save them. He grabbed a guard's fallen weapon and slipped through the shadows. The facility around him was massive, full of echoing halls and bright white lights. He moved silently, his mind racing. Every corner, every door felt like a trap. But he didn't care. In a room ahead, he saw them, Lyra and Taryn, trapped inside a glass containment cell. Scientists surrounded them, machines humming with cruel purpose. Taryn was crying, the glow in his skin pulsing brighter with fear. Lyra shouted, He's just a child, please stop. But the soldiers ignored her, preparing the scanners. Elias's anger exploded. He aimed the weapon and fired. The glass shattered. Alarm was blaring through the facility. Smoke filled the air as soldiers shouted orders. Lyra reached for her son, and Elias ran toward them. Come on, he yelled, his voice echoing through the chaos. As they escaped through the smoke, one thing became clear. The betrayal had broken his trust, but it had also ignited his fury. And this time, Elias would not run. He would fight, not just for survival, but for the right of one small boy to live free. The alarms screamed through the corridors of the galactic facility. Red lights flashed across the metallic walls, turning everything into chaos. Smoke and sparks filled the air as Elias led Lyra and Taryn through the narrow passageways. Behind them, soldiers shouted orders, their heavy boots echoing like thunder. Move faster, Elias hissed, pulling Lyra by the hand. She stumbled but kept running, clutching her son tightly to her chest. Taryn's small glowing hands left faint trails of blue light in the smoky air. Blaster fire burst around them, striking the walls. Elias ducked behind a storage crate, firing back with a stolen plasma rifle. He hit the lights above, plunging the hall into half-darkness. The soldiers hesitated, giving them a few seconds to move. This way, Elias shouted, guiding them toward the maintenance sector. The air smelled of oil and burning metal. Every corner they turned felt like it could be the last. Lyra's heart pounded wildly. She could barely breathe, her body weak from days of fear and hunger. Yet she kept moving. For her son, for the promise Elias made. They reached a large metal door at the end of the corridor, sealed tight. Elias typed frantically on the control panel. It's locked, Lyra gasped. Elias gritted his teeth. Not for long. He pulled out a small device from his pocket, an EMP trigger he had built long ago. He pressed it against the panel. Sparks flew and the door hissed open with a metallic groan. They slipped inside. Just as more guards appeared at the far end, bullets ricocheted off the door as Elias slammed it shut and sealed it manually. They were inside the engine hangar. Rows of old ships stood in silence, covered in dust and wires. This was where the outdated transport pods were kept, the kind no one used anymore. Lyra looked around in disbelief. We can't fly these. They're dead. Elias smiled faintly. Then we'll bring one back to life. He rushed to the nearest pod, opening its control hatch. Inside were tangled wires, dead batteries, and a cracked energy cell. Taryn crawled beside him, watching with wide eyes. Elias worked quickly, his fingers moving with practiced skill. I can power it manually, he said, but it won't hold long. Lyra helped however she could, tightening bolts and handing him tools. Her hands shook, but her eyes burned with determination. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was fighting. Outside, the pounding on the hangar door grew louder. The soldiers were using plasma cutters to break through. Elias shouted, Taryn, get in the pod. The boy hesitated. What about you? Elias smiled. I'll be right behind you. Taryn climbed inside, hugging his knees, the glow in his hands pulsing faster. Lyra followed, securing him into the seat. Elias connected the final cable and hit the ignition switch. Nothing happened. He hit it again, and still nothing. The engines coughed, sputtered, and died. The sound of the door breaking echoed behind them. Elias's heart raced. He slammed his fist against the console. Come on, come on! Then, suddenly, Terran reached forward, his small hands glowing brighter than ever before. He touched the ship's controls gently, and the dead engines roared to life. The lights inside the pod glowed blue, and the metal walls vibrated with energy. Elias stared in disbelief. "He's powering it," Lyra gasped. "He's connected to it somehow." Terran looked up, his eyes glowing softly. "It listens to me." The hangar door exploded open, soldiers flooding in. Elias jumped into the pilot's seat and slammed the throttle forward. The pod rose from the ground, wind and fire swirling beneath it. Blaster shots flew past, hitting the metal walls. Lyra held Terran close, whispering, "Don't be afraid." Elias gritted his teeth, steering hard as the ship burst through the broken hangar roof. The sunlight blinded them for a moment, then they were free, soaring over the frozen city of Neuralis. Below them, alarms echoed through every district. Drones chased after them, firing energy nets and laser bursts. Elias weaved between skyscrapers, his hands steady on the controls. "We can't outrun them for long," Lyra warned. Elias nodded. "We don't need to, just far enough to reach the outer shield." The ship shook as a drone fired a missile. The blast threw them sideways, alarms screaming inside the cabin. Elias grabbed the controls again, his voice firm. "Hold on tight." Terran closed his eyes, his small body trembling. The glow around his hands spread across the cockpit. Every flickering light turned stable. Every warning sound stopped. The ship straightened on its own, moving faster than before. Elias looked at him in awe. "You're doing this, aren't you?" Terran smiled faintly. "It listens to my heart." They burst through the clouds, the city fading below like a bad dream. Behind them, the pursuing drones exploded in a wave of light. For a few moments, there was silence. Pure, peaceful silence. Lyra held her son close, tears falling freely. Elias looked at them, a small smile breaking through his exhaustion. "We did it," he whispered. But deep down, he knew the fight wasn't over. They had escaped the city, but not the galaxy that wanted them dead. As the pod drifted into open space, the stars reflected in the glass. Lyra whispered softly, "Where will we go now?" Elias looked ahead at the endless sky and said quietly, "Somewhere the law can't follow, and maybe somewhere hope still lives." And as the stars stretched across the horizon, the human, the alien mother, and the glowing child disappeared into the unknown, leaving behind a world that would soon whisper their names in fear and wonder. The stars stretched endlessly before them. The pod drifted through the darkness, its engines humming softly. For the first time in days, there were no alarms, no soldiers, no sound of chasing drones, only silence, broken by the steady breathing of the three souls inside. Elias sat at the controls, his face pale but calm. Lyra watched him quietly, her hand resting on Terran's shoulder. The child was asleep, his small chest rising and falling, his skin still faintly glowing. The galaxy outside looked peaceful, but Elias knew peace was a lie. They had escaped Neuralis, but the law reached farther than stars. Somewhere behind them, warships were already searching. He looked at the navigation screen. It blinked weakly, running on low power. The fuel was almost gone, and the ship's oxygen would last only a few more hours. Lyra noticed his expression and whispered, "We're not safe yet, are we?" Elias shook his head slowly. "Not yet, but maybe we can be." He opened a small compartment beside his seat and pulled out a star map. A holographic chart flickered to life, showing hundreds of glowing dots. "There," he said, pointing at a small, quiet system far from the trade routes. A moon called Calum 9, no patrols, no scanners, just farmers and wind. Lyra's eyes softened. A place to hide. Elias nodded. A place to start over. He entered the coordinates manually, and the engines rumbled weakly as the ship turned. But every mile they traveled drained the pod's life. The lights flickered, the controls dimmed, and the oxygen alarm beeped quietly. Elias's breathing grew shallow, but he said nothing. He had taken a blaster hit during the escape, a small wound near his ribs. He'd covered it with fabric, hiding it from Lyra. Now the blood had soaked through, dark and heavy. His hands trembled slightly on the controls, but his will didn't waver. Lyra finally saw the blood on his side. Her heart froze. "You're hurt." Elias smiled faintly. "Just a scratch." But his voice was weak, and his skin had lost all color. "You saved us," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. Elias looked at her, his expression soft. "I didn't save you, Lyra. I just gave you a chance." The pod shuddered as it entered the thin atmosphere of Calum 9. Below them spread fields of silver grass and wide lakes shining under two suns. It was a quiet, beautiful world, untouched by war. Elias smiled weakly. Perfect landing spot. He guided the ship down, the engines coughing their last breath. When the pod touched the ground, everything went still, No alarms, no danger, only wind. Lyra helped Terran wake up. He blinked, looking out at the glowing fields. "It's warm," he said softly, smiling for the first time in days. Elias leaned back in his seat, breathing heavily. He looked at the boy. "You did great, Terran." The child tilted his head. "Are you okay, Mr. Elias?" Elias smiled faintly. "Just tired, buddy." Lyra turned toward him, her eyes full of worry. "You need help, we can find medicine." Elias shook his head. "No, you can't risk it, they'll come here soon." He looked outside at the soft horizon, his voice quiet but firm. "You have to take the pod and leave it hidden. Raise him here, keep him safe." Lyra shook her head, crying, "No, you're coming with us." Elias smiled, his eyes kind. "Lyra, I was never meant to survive this, but you two, you can give this galaxy something it's forgotten." Lyra sobbed. "What?" he whispered. "Hope." She knelt beside him, holding his hand. For the first time, she saw not just a human, but a heart stronger than any law or weapon. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal pendant. It was shaped like a broken gear, the symbol of his old engineering crew. He placed it in Terran's small hands. "Keep this," he said softly. "When you grow up, remember, machines can be rebuilt. People can too." Terran looked at him, eyes full of tears. "Will I see you again?" he asked. Elias smiled weakly. "You'll see me in the stars." The light inside the pod dimmed. Elias closed his eyes, his breathing slowing. Lyra leaned close, whispering, "Thank you." Outside, the twin suns rose higher, painting the world in gold and blue. When the wind passed over the field, it carried the faint hum of the ship's last power. Lyra lifted Terran into her arms and stepped out into the sunlight. Behind her, the pod stood silent, a resting place for the man who had given everything. Years passed on Calum 9. The boy grew into a young man, his power stable, his heart kind. He learned to speak both human and Noralan tongues. And when travelers finally reached that quiet world, they spoke of a young leader named Terran Ward, who united refugees and colonists, who built cities where humans and aliens lived side by side. And in every home, above every doorway, hung a small broken gear, a symbol of the man who taught them what kindness truly meant. And when the stars shone over the fields of Calum 9, some said they could still hear the hum of an old ship and the whisper of a voice that said softly, "Humanity isn't about power, it's about the choice to care." And with that truth, Elias's legacy lived on, not in blood, not in history books, but in every act of kindness that survived the darkness.